It's a great pleasure to see you here. May I ask you before we start, who has read that thick book she mentioned, Nutrition Raisonnée, of you, that I know a little bit the background? Who read it? Not so many. That's good. And you're all professionals like doctors or naturopaths or pharmacists? Student, all mixed. Naturopath. We have some medical doctors, pharmacists, so a very mixed audience. Great. Don't write anything what you see here down. You get it on paper and on stick anyway, so just note other things on the side. Don't worry, I won't read everything to you, which will appear there. On the first half of the afternoon, I want to give you an overview over our main problems. We all share normally the same desire to live better, longer lives. But the question is why we actually fail in doing so in spite of our tremendous technological advancement and our prosperity. So that's my wife, by the way. These two other gentlemen you will meet along. They're good examples of longevity. And we will take a little different approach. In medicine, in medical school, we usually had a focus on some ion channels, receptors. We were trained to be good pharmaceutical representatives, but not really to be good doctors and to see the broader picture. So we focus on this today. And also our science has a tendency to analyze the ink in the book of life and not really the content. And that leads to a lot of problems. So as just one example, is it just chance that our lungs are so similar to trees and the one produce the oxygen that we consume and we turn it back into carbon dioxide that the trees use up? So we see this is one of the many, many circles of life that govern our planet and our nature. And we focus on the why of disease, and we keep asking that question. So for centuries, our main problem was disease, infectious disease, killing dramatically and quickly. Plagues, wars, infant mortality, bad hygiene. So we solved this problem in the last 200 years, and our life expectancies for that reason only really went up a lot. We did not extend our healthy lifespan, really. We are doing really bad there, and latest studies show we really have to slow down the aging process, or at least stop speeding it up if we want to have a healthy, longer life. So our new problems are silent killers. They're not dramatic killers that we are used to. They're like our daily high-paced, high-stress life, many sensuous impressions, lack of sleep, too much to do, worries, lack of exercise. And we've become addicted to high-energy food. That's not food with a lot of energy, but with a lot of calories. So, and it's addictive food in per se. And leads up to very high percentage of metabolic syndrome, which is a breeding ground of hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, up to cancer. That's on the one side. On the other side, we have a tremendous increase in burnout, chronic fatigue, or depression, whatever you name it. That's for those who give up earlier and don't just go up the hypertension ladder. And at the end, we see the catabolic states of loss of bones and muscles. And often it is a simple hip fracture that's ending the independent life of somebody. So actually, it's very important to start taking care of that in time. So obviously, one thing that went wrong is that we used to run around a lot to gather our food, and now we drive around a lot, doing the same, and the lack of daily exercise is a big problem. And another obvious problem is our diet. And it doesn't really help that there's so many discussions about what is a healthy diet and what isn't. And especially all the pseudo-experts disagree. Usually the experts are quite agree. And yeah, that's usually the diet of most people, the Garfield diet. So by nature and our metabolism, we are omnivores, but used to a very high percentage of plant food, which is shown in our enzymes. Like, we don't make our own vitamin C, our uric acid cycle is weak, our teeth are not really very good in slaughtering deer on the hunt and so on. So if we start eating mainly animal food, obviously we have a problem. Even the trained meat eaters like the cheetahs or lion do have a real energy problem. They are known to be very fast, but indeed, if you really study them, like in a nature study, in the magazine Nature, the max they had was like 54 kilometers per hour, and they usually ran 200 meters before they gave up. So, they are fast, but really have no stamina. They don't last. They have no energy, no lasting energy. That's their problem. And it's connected with their diet. A very high protein diet makes you really tired. And the real achievers in the mammal are the herbivores, like bulls or horses, which can run 2 kilometers at a speed of 60 kilometers. So this is not by chance, but it's connected to our energy production, and it's connected with the protein catabolism also. So our diet has 4 main problem parts, which is like different meat products, a lot of dairy, sugar, white flour, and salt. And these 3 basically lead up to the deadly quartet of the metabolic syndrome, which you probably know, which is like fatty liver, fatty abdomen inside. That's the main problem. That's directly connected with insulin resistance, leading up to diabetes, dyslipidemia, which is like increased triglycerides, and hypertension, which is the #1 killer by now. So, metabolic syndrome feels great. You don't feel bad, really. You don't see any need to go to a doctor. Hypertensive people usually feel better than hypotensive people, and people with high blood sugar also usually feel quite well. So the problem is that it really feels well for decades until you get the diagnosis diabetes and your cardiovascular system is wrecked and your kidney is already damaged, and you may have already developed some prostate cancer or some other cancer, or your carotids or your coronary arteries are getting blocked, and so on. This is the breeding ground of our lifestyle diseases, and it's going to get a lot more dramatic in terms of diabetes. So previously, we used to eat like 3 meals a day. Nowadays, most people snack throughout the day, and it's like a vicious cycle where we always feed new sugar, carbohydrates, protein, fat. So all these macronutrients are always high, and we always fire a new insulin excretion, which depletes it, and we have to keep feeding it. It's like in, out. Normally, we're used to food that is like slow food, like it affects our metabolism like a mild summer rain. Our food nowadays is more like a tsunami. It shoots up very quickly in the blood. Now, be it sugar, protein, or fat, like typical McDonald's fast food, it rushes into your blood. That's why it's called fast food. Not only you can eat it fast, but it also rushes into your blood fast. Problem is, it's soon out of your blood, and you have to refeed, and you get into a real vicious cycle, which is governed by the brain, which screams, I need more energy again, because it's already down. So it's also an addictive cycle because it's directly connected with dopamine in the brain. Usually we focus a lot on like glycemic index, which is not that important actually, because more important is really the insulin effect of foods. And this is quite different from the glycemic effect. If you look here, of course, glucose is defined as insulin index 100 or glycemic index 100. But then you see like fruit yogurt has really a little glycemic load, but a very high insulin index. So it releases insulin at a really dramatic rate. The same skim milk with even less carbohydrates, or steak without any carbohydrates, makes a pretty high insulin release. And now we come to our typical diet: steak and potatoes, or pig and potatoes, whatever. A very high insulin release, almost as much as pure sugar, or not even pure sugar, that's lower, pure glucose. So if you go though on the Mediterranean way, which would be like pasta with lentils, it's half the insulin release. Or white beans, which is like even better, it has the same amount of carbohydrates, like skim milk, but 1/3 of the insulin release. So that's why legumes are great food, and all the longest living people, their main protein source is legumes, obviously not steak and potatoes. By the way, tofu is also very good in terms half the amount of steak in terms of insulin release, although it has carbohydrates, which is like tofu as a typical Asian food. So why is insulin bad? Insulin, we need insulin. It's great. You feel great. The problem is it's highly anabolic. If you always have too much, you first grow because all the growth hormones are connected with it. But then you get obese and finally really ill. It helps the cells to feed up with sugar, with fat, with protein. So when the cell deposits fat, this causes insulin resistance. Insulin resistance basically is fat in the cell. In the liver, it's central insulin resistance, and in the muscle, it's peripheral insulin resistance. So what it also does, it raises cholesterol, estrogens, blood lipids, heart rate, blood pressure. It directly affects the reward system, the dopamine system in the brain, and as we know, it leads up to diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so on. And remember, insulin is connected with insulin-like growth factors, which directly stimulate cell growth, cell division, and as we know now, cancer. So most people with the sugar disease usually think sugar is the main reason they have the problem. It is part of the problem, but it is actually a smaller part of the problem. You have the male diabetes person, which is typically the sausage, meat, and beer diabetes person. You see in the large EPIC studies that animal protein, if you ate a lot of animal protein, you raised your diabetes risk 118 times. If you ate a lot of carbohydrate, only 15%. Very surprising, but very sound data. Meta-analysis from Harvard, basically with 500,000 people, shows the same. Processed meats, which is like burgers, sausages, and so on, is worst. Just 50 grams increases your diabetes risk a lot, 50%. If you replace it by nuts or whole grains, you lower it directly. Another interesting study by Walter Longo showed a 5-fold increase in diabetes in people who ate a lot of protein in their middle age, around 40 to 60, and also a great cancer increase. So to summarize, our typical diet is really bad in terms of insulin resistance, a lot of saturated fats, and things that cause insulin resistance, and it causes a lot of hyperinsulinemia. The low-carb fat, it's a little better because less insulin, obviously, but it still causes insulin resistance and high cortisol, by the way. And the Mediterranean Asian is the best, and we know they're considered the most healthy diets. They're the best in terms of insulin resistance and insulin secretion. Again, the basic principle is slow food, steady energy, not shooting up, falling down. Who knows Walter Longo? He's the #1 longevity researcher in the world now. He, the whole fasting, mimicking diet and interval fasting, that goes back to him. He proved also in terms of basic cell signaling that a high protein, low carb, high fat diet promote cancer, cardiovascular disease, and the aging process itself. That's very interesting. Via multiple pathways. We all know EGF1, mTOR. He also found other ones like TOR, S6K, and protein kinase A. Well, he is really not a fan of low-carb diets. He's a fan of like 5 days fasting twice a year. We come to that a little more. This is in my book. I really suggest to look at it in the book, not here. I'm also not going to explain it in detail. It just shows the interconnectedness, basically, of all our lifestyle diseases on all the different levels. Starting up, really, with what we eat, what it does with the hormones, the chronic damages that appear leading up to our lifestyle diseases. And we have two parts, which are the macronutrients and the secondary plant substances. But we also have the other part, which is very unknown to doctors, which is the acid, alkaline, and mineral disbalances, which play also a very, very important role in the genesis of our lifestyle diseases. So I was asked to speak about mitochondrial dysfunction because it's, of course, now mitochondria is the little things that look like bacteria and make our energy. They turn basically fat and sugar into ATP, and it's connected with all major health problems. To make it very simple, if you look at all the studies in depth, like in overseeding, it's always the same picture. If you feed too much to humans or lab animals, the mitochondria try to digest it. You see that all the metabolic enzymes of the respiratory chain are upregulated. They try to convert it into energy, and yeah, what happens if you drive a Fiat all the time at 200 kilometers per hour? It breaks. That's happening to our mitochondria. They over-endeavor, and there's too much oxidative damage, nitrosative damage, and there are more and more damages to the structure of the mitochondria, and the energy production starts declining. And when it starts declining, it's pretty rapidly. You all know that phenomenon. We were able to eat like tons of stuff. 4,000 calories a day were no problem, and we didn't put on any weight. And then mid-30 it starts, and 40 it gets difficult, and after that age you really have to work hard not to put on weight, except you're blessed like some with a more intense metabolism. That's what's happening, basically. A gradual decline, and if we are not careful, it's a rapid decline. That would be normal. That's what we have today. We're destroying it. That's why we don't need to stop aging. We need to stop speeding up aging. That's what we do with our lifestyle. So, as a very simple metaphor, you all know when you have, that device and you put in too much flour, nothing goes through. The same happens in our metabolic pathways in the cell. If you put in too much of everything at once, it doesn't work anymore. And that's what we see in insulin resistance. We have a lot of diglycerides. We have a lot of half-digested stuff that's clotting up the cell. It's not that I'm making that up, but that's really happening. You congest your whole cell with half-digested things. In Ayurveda, that's called ama. Undigested stuff is toxin. And that's, in fact, what's happening down there. Well, yeah, that's a good way to get there at early age also. And we talk now more or less about the macronutrients. Now we turn more to the minerals. There was one real dramatic change in the last thousands of years, but also especially in the last 200 years. We all used to eat a lot of potatoes with little salt 150 years ago. All Europeans were at around 5 grams of potassium at least and not much salt, and we sweated it out. And longer ago, we were at like 10 grams of potassium and almost no sodium. So now it shifted to 10 grams of salt, or like 4 or 5 grams of sodium per day, and to around 3 grams of potassium. So the ratio just really went upside down. And this regulates not only blood pressure, but membrane potential and pretty much really everything in our cell. That's why we are the first and only mammal with hypertension. It's quite an achievement. Hypertension is really a harmless thing because, well, it feels good, but it's the killer number 1 nowadays. It kills more people than smoking worldwide. So like a blood pressure machine is basic equipment of every household over the age of 40. So basically the potatoes turned into potato chips, and that's behind a lot of our problems.